Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode, and yes, I am back from Europe now. I didn't end up going to a single card shop in Europe. I was basically just visiting like all of those tourist types of things. Tom actually left for Europe around the same time that I got back, so for the next week or so it's just gonna be me here, but I think that's fine because there is so much for us to catch up on. Legacy of Destruction has done some interesting things to the format, but we also have the usual suspects with new cards being revealed over in the OCG and things like that. So today I'm going to go over some of the main cards that I've made note of over the past couple of weeks that have been trending on the market, and then this weekend and next week we'll take a look at some of the cards from Legacy of Destruction, as well as some more under the radar price movements. Let's get started. So kicking things off, I actually want to start off with First Movement Solo. So one of the archetypes that got some great support in Legacy of Destruction was Melodious, and they've proven to be a surprisingly viable strategy. Now at the YCS in Brazil, we actually saw Snake Eye Melodious in the finals, and I've also seen a ton of pure Melodious deck lists that have done well at the regional level as well. It is a really cool deck, but I think it went kind of under the radar because it wasn't particularly strong over in the OCG. Now here in the TCG, we have Pot of Prosperity at 3, so we're able to dig for Ostinato much more easily. Now overall, the Melodious deck is pretty cheap. You have a couple of cards that are worth a few bucks now, like Schuberta and Ostinato, but a lot of the cards from the deck were printed in low rarities before, so they're quite easily accessible. First Movement Solo is a card that is one of the best starters for the deck. If you control no monsters, you can special summon a Melodious monster from your deck, but then you're locked into Melodious monsters for the rest of the turn. This card is only used in the pure version of the strategy, but the deck has actually been performing surprisingly well beyond what players thought it would do. On top of that, the card only has super rare printings, the original one from the set, one as a promo from the Super Edition, and then a tin reprint as well, before we knew that the card was trending, but I think most of us thought that the deck was just going to be rogue, so it never really went above that like $10 to $15 mark. Now, however, that the deck is validated by these competitive results, we see all versions of the card up between $25 and $30. Crazy price point, but it makes sense seeing as it's pretty much the only expensive card needed to put the strategy together. I would think that this card will be reprinted in an OTS tournament pack soon, since it does need a reprint badly, but it doesn't really fit into the theme of Rarity Collection 2 or Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge. If you aren't playing Melodious, of course, then this is an obvious sell. This is a good card for you to look for in your holo bulk if you happen to have been playing the game for quite a while. This is one that you guys probably would have already been aware of, but I still want to make a note of it for those that are unaware. Bestial Dissipator is a card that's gotten a lot of attention over the last couple of weeks. The ban list hitting Baron de Fleur means that players no longer have access to a generic rank 10 Omni Negate, so players are looking for other options to run. Specifically in pure Snake Eye, Baron would often be made with Formula Synchron and Flamber's Dragon, but they've now lost both Baron and Savage Dragon. Dissipator is an almost generic level 10 synchro. It does require the non-tuner monster to be a dragon. However, Flamberge is a dragon, which means that it can be actually made pretty easily. Pure Snake Eye players are still using Jet Synchron, but their lines are a bit different now. What they do instead is they make Psyframe Lord Omega as their level 8 synchro to rip a card from the opponent's hand, and then they make Dissipator to summon back the Omega and rip a second card. That's really good value, and it puts your opponent on very few resources, especially if they already used one or two of their hand traps. They basically only have a couple of cards left, and Dissipator can also potentially be an interruption, either negating or destroying a monster that has activated its effect, depending on what it puts back from the banished pile. Now, unfortunately though, Dissipator is a relatively new card that came out in Cyberstorm Access. It is a relatively recent set, but it's been a little while since it actually came out, so we now see Dissipators sitting between $45 and $50, which is up from the $30 that we'd seen them at for the previous 6 months or so. Now, to be fair, this card should be reprinted in the 2024 tins, since it does state on the product description for the tins that Cyberstorm Access cards will be in there, and I don't really see why they wouldn't reprint this card. Ultimately though, it is going to be up to you guys depending on how much you see yourselves using the card, since we do have nationals and other big events which will take place before the reprint drops. So speaking of results, the one that I found to be pretty funny is Laundry Dragon Maid. Believe it or not, this card was actually used as a 3-of in a Paleozoic list that made top 8 at a regionals over in Belgium. On summon, this card mills 3 cards from the top of your deck, but it also happens to be a level 2 water monster. Now at first I thought that this might be something trying to replace Tearlament's Merly in the Tearlament strategy. However, it's actually something that gets summoned off of Soldier Dragons in that Paleozoic deck, Hopefully you can mill some paleo trap cards before using this card to make either totally awesome or gigantic sprite. It is really interesting. It's a niche application of the card, but I don't know, I always find it really fascinating when players go through and they find a card from a completely unrelated archetype that happens to have some crazy synergy somewhere else. Now, in terms of price, we've seen the original supers shoot straight up. They were relatively cheap before. They did almost hit $15 at one point, but they've since cooled back down to a much more reasonable $7 to $8. And then with the gold rares, they're still not a very nice rarity in my opinion, but they're around $2 to $3 each as well. This isn't something I'd worry too much about, since I don't think players are really thinking that Paleozoic is going to be this huge threat at something like Nationals, but the fact that you can take advantage of the hype now to actually move some of those pretty ugly gold rares that have been probably taking up space in your bulk is good enough for me. So this one's kind of interesting. We did actually talk about it sometime last year. It's Bengal Lancer the Resurgent. So this is a Link 4 monster that requires 2 or more plant monsters to make. It does have kind of a weak interruption attached to it where you can bounce an opponent's monster, but you have to take damage equal to that monster's attack points. It does also have the ability to revive itself, where you can banish 2 or more Link monsters from your graveyard with a combined Link rating of 4 to special summon this card back, but then banish it when it leaves the field. So one of the more interesting archetypes to come out in Legacy of Destruction is the Ragnarika. They combine plants, insects, and reptiles sort of the same way that Tri-Brigades combine Beast, Wing Beast, and Beast Warriors. So in my mind, I think that automatically screams some sort of potential. The thing is, they don't really have great generic monsters that they can go into. This card can technically be made with something like Ragnarika Skeletal Soldier and Aromaseraphy Jasmine, but I don't know how great that would be. I haven't seen a single Ragnarika deck list, even top of regionals or anything. What I will say is that of the few generic plant, reptile, or insect link monsters that you could end your board with, Bengal Lancer is one of the slightly better ones, and that's why it's commanding any attention at all. On top of that, it does have just the one secret rare printing from Lightning Overdrive, and because of that, this did hit a peak of around $20 a couple of weeks ago, but it has since then cooled off to around the $7 to $8 mark. Lightning Overdrive is a bit too old to be reprinted in the 2024 tins, so I don't know how likely it is that this card will be reprinted. I think it's reasonable to hold on to 1 or 2 copies, just in case Ragnarika gets some crazy support, but the archetype being pretty weak, and the high chance of the card getting a reprint if they do get good support, means that I would not be wanting to hold on to too many copies of this card. Alright, this is a card that we discussed when the Fiendsmith archetype was first revealed. It is Fabled Lurry. Now this is a level 1 Fiend monster that simply special summons itself out when it's discarded, and yes, I do now know that it's not a tuner monster, but the card is still useful because of the fact that the Fiend Link deck seems to be getting some hype, combining the Yugioh, Unchained, and Fiendsmith archetypes. Specifically, the Fiendsmith archetype has a spell card that lets you search for a Fiend and then discard a card, meaning that you can automatically get this card as a free body onto the board to make Link plays with. Right now in the OCG, I believe that the cards are okay. They're not completely broken or anything. At the YCS that just took place in Japan a week or 2 ago, the Fiendsmith cards were used in decks like Snake Eye, Yubel, and Whitewoods, but the event seemed to have been dominated still by Tenpai Dragon, Snake Eye Fire King, and Voiceless Voice. Now nonetheless, the engine still has a ton of potential, and the OCG and TCG don't always necessarily line up with each other. Melodious and Unchained are 2 strategies that weren't really on our radar here in the TCG initially because they didn't perform particularly well over in the OCG. For that reason, I think it's reasonable to at least own a copy of Fabled Lurry in case you do want to use the engine. This card does have some crazy prices. The Hidden Arsenal Super is about $10. It did, however, get that common reprint from Battles of Legend Chapter 1, which is coming in at $5. Thankfully, we had that reprint because that made the card so much more accessible. With the original DT printing, the cheapest ones when I was looking on TCG Player were about $40 to $50, but based on the sold listings, the highest that someone has actually paid is around $20, so make of it what you will. I've said this with a ton of cards in the past, but those one of bricks that you just play, I'm basically always okay with just playing low rarity versions instead of spending a crazy amount of money for these one of bricks. But yeah, I would still keep an eye on the OCG for now and just see how the deck performs. Expect people to be looking for this card as we get closer to the release of the Infinite Forbidden. Okay, so this is one I can't believe we're talking about. It's Salamangreat Pyro Phoenix. So some backstory on this card. Tom and I were doing this price prediction video on Chaos Impact cards, and I was like, this card's kind of trash. There's no way that Salamangreats are going to play this. but Tom said this is going to be like one of the best secrets in the set. It gave Salamangreat access to this board wipe from the extra deck. It's going to be like a $50-$60 card. We always joke about it every now and then because it ended up being a bad call because this card was like a bulk secret rare for so long. However, here we are a few years later, and people are unironically making Pyro Phoenix in Salamangreat in 2024, and they're doing well with it. Now, to be fair, this card does have a few solid effects. It's a board wipe if you reincarnate Link Summon with it. It summons a Link monster from your opponent's graveyard back to their side of the field, so that sets up for you to take it, or it forces out like a Promethean Princess effect, and it also burns your opponent for damage equal to the Link monster's attack points when it's summoned out. Now, to be fair, this card did get a lot easier to make with the release of Promethean Princess, so between this and Raging Phoenix, Salamangreat does have a couple of really viable Link 4 options that can be easily summoned. It is kind of interesting to see Salamangreat doing well, but I do see them get talked about quite a bit. They have quite a few regional tops, and they do still have the ability to run like 12 to 15 hand traps quite easily. Overall, we have seen some small bumps for Pyro Phoenix across the board, nothing too insane. The Ultras used to basically be bulk, maybe $1 or so. They're now $2 to $3 each. However, the secrets used to be $5 to $7. They're now all the way up at $15. And then with the Starlight rares, they were down at $65 to $70, but they're now up to $90 a piece. Overall, I don't think I'm too scared of Salamangreat. They'll be a deck that can do well at regionals and stuff like that, but I don't think they're going to do too well at something like a YCS. It is just always funny to see cards going from being completely hated for being one of the worst possible pulls in the set to suddenly being something that's genuinely useful. And finally, the last card I want to make note of is Triple Tactics Thrust. So Thrust, I feel like, is a card that hasn't seen much usage for the last 6 months or so. It was really good back when Unchained was arguably the best deck, but it fell off until the most recent ban list. Thrust is one of the most broken cards in the game in my opinion, searching for any normal spell or trap card as long as your opponent has activated a monster effect this turn. I feel like this card is useful when you're going first or second. Going first, if your opponent hand traps you, which is very likely with the state of the game right now and all the hand traps people are playing, you can set a Karma Cannon or Dimensional Barrier to potentially stop your opponent from playing the game. Or going second, you can search some pretty strong board breakers like Change of Heart, Mind Control, or Harpy's Feather Duster. So back in Unchained format, this card was crazy. The OTS Ultimate Rares were like $120, the Secrets were $100. The Ultra Rare printing that came in Maze of Millennia cooled off the prices quite a bit, but it went even lower than I think most people were expecting, with the Ultras settling at around 40, and then even the Ultis were at like 60 to 70 bucks. However, the card is seeing much more play again now, and so we see all versions of the card starting to trend back up. The Ultis are back up to 80, while the Secrets and even the Ultras sit between $60 and $70. However, I think the big thing that's stopping the card from going any higher in price is the fact that we still have Rarity Collection 2 dropping at the end of the month, and we are still not sure if Thrust is going to be reprinted in the set. It does seem likely, since the card already has 3 different printings out, but I think it's impossible to guess one way or the other at this point. Of course, if it's confirmed to be in there, then all printings of Thrust will tank. However, if it's not in there, then we would expect Thrust to continue its upward trend, and we'll probably even see the Ultis go back up over the $100 mark, and the Secrets and Ultras not too far behind. Unfortunately, this is 100% a gamble with it being able to go either way, so you guys will have to decide whether or not to offload it, or if it's worth keeping so that you can play it. Alright guys, that is it for today's episode. I am going to be going over the Legacy of Destruction cards tomorrow, so that's going to be on Saturday. I am pretty excited to see all of the Legacy of Destruction stuff because I actually haven't been around for while Legacy of Destruction was actually legal, so I'm still scrambling to pick up all the different cards from the set as well. But I'm also super excited for Rarity Collection 2. Hopefully we're going to be having those reveals come out soon and, see how that shakes things up with the market as well. Anyways, guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure that you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.